Okay, ladies and gentlemen. All right, folks, let's bring ourselves to a bit of a focus and get our program started. Thank you all for coming. My name is John Hamre. I'm the president here at CSIS. And this is a conference I wasn't sure was ever going to happen. I've got to give a little bit of its provenance. I now share my chairman of my board is also active on the University of Chicago's board, Tom Pritzker, and he said about a year ago, he said, I think that you and Chicago ought to get together. They've got their 75th anniversary coming up. Well, we didn't get it together in time for the 75th anniversary, but there were so many shared interests in the topic that we stayed with it, and then today's conference is going to be the result of that. And I am really grateful for the collaboration. Sarah Ladislaw managed it on my end, and she's going to run this program this afternoon. But I'm very glad that we could be doing this and working together with EPIC and at Chicago. And so thank you all for coming, and I thank our EPIC friends for working with us on this. If I had been involved, I would have argued with the title of the conference, can nuclear compete? Because the answer is no, not with the landscape that we have, but that's not the issue. The most important, I think, public policy ever created, at least in the last century, was Atoms for Peace. And it was remarkable how important that was in shaping the security environment of the last 70 years, 65 years. Embedded in the core was, what are you going to do with a commercial technology that could be economically very important, but also has great military significance, dangerous military significance. And very wisely, the Eisenhower administration realized that if we're going to manage it and control it, we have to ground it on promoting commercial nuclear energy. Because commercial nuclear energy gives us the capacity to monitor illicit activity that we have to control. And the whole foundation of non-proliferation really rests on the fact that commercial nuclear energy is the focal point for our security policy. We've kind of lost track of that in this country, and I'm very worried about where we're heading. The people that helped put together, the non-proliferation architecture, the Europeans and us and the Japanese, all of us are somewhat in retreat on nuclear policy. And in talking with some friends here today before we got started, the question was, we should title this, will nuclear survive? And I would say I don't think we as a nation can afford to let nuclear go, because it remains the foundation for America having a leadership role in shaping the security environment around the world. If the only people that sell reactors 30 years from now are the Chinese and the Russians, we're going to have a hard time trying to impose security discipline through the non-proliferation treaty. So it's very important for us to explore this together, extremely important. We're going to get to that during this conference today. We're going to start in a phased way, and we're going to be working our way through it. Ask everybody to hang on for the third panel, where we start talking about nuclear as a security issue. And so I want to say thank you all for coming. Delighted to have you here. This is going to be a valuable discussion. Oh, one last thing. When we have outside groups that come here with us, we always give a little safety announcement in advance. Nothing's going to happen, but if anything were to happen, you'll hear a voice that'll come overhead and say, please follow instructions. Sarah is responsible for your safety. She will protect you. We've got the exits are right behind me. There are these three exits. This one's the one closest to the stairs that take us down to the street. We'll take two left-hand turns and a right. We'll go over to National Geographic. They know we're coming. And there's a great show now on that's over there. We'll pay for everybody's ticket, okay? So we're going to all be safe. Everybody's going to be well. Just follow Sarah if we have to ask you to do something. Sarah, please welcome Sarah Ladislaw, who's pulled this together today.
Well, you learn something new every day. I didn't know we paid for tickets at the National Geographic, so I'm going to add that to my safety spiel whenever we're opening up events. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamre. My name is Sarah Ladislaw. I'm the Senior Vice President and Director of the Energy and National Security Program here at CSIS. It's a real delight to have all of you here today. You know, in the 10 years that I've been at CSIS, one of the things I know is that Dr. Henry is one of the most committed people to the full value and ecosystem of nuclear and the attributes that it brings to U.S. national security, the energy sector, and a whole host of other issues. And so over the years, we've done a series of these kinds of conferences where, from my sort of humble energy sector background, you see nuclear struggling to compete in a variety of different ways. But we've tried to bring it into that broader strategic framework that Dr. Henry just introduced by asking, you know, what are the different lenses through which nuclear is struggling to compete? And so that was one of when we were talking with the folks at EPIC about what could we do together, that really was a timely and thoughtful exploration of where nuclear is today and the policy and commercial environment and security environment around questions of how to make it compete better, or just evaluating the terms under which it's struggling. And we came up with the structure for today's event. I just wanted to say thank you to the folks at EPIC for coming and doing this event together. We have not done something together before, and for those of you who don't know the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago, I commend to you to go to their website and check out some of the work that they do. It's real and strong interdisciplinary contributions to some of the biggest energy challenges we face. And I know we here at the CSIS Energy Program value what they do a great deal, so I certainly hope that you all check it out. In addition to what Dr. Henry said about the origins of today's conference, I would just say we had another conference that was similarly profiled towards the end of 2016, and it was one where then Secretary Ernie Moniz came and gave a presentation. It was shortly after the Secretary of Energy's advisory board had released a giant study on nuclear, which I think a lot of people in this room were involved in. And the topic was nuclear at a crossroads. So sort of similar to today, but it tackled the issue of all the ways in which nuclear can compete across its value chain to contributing to some of the major energy and societal challenges of the day. And I think it was a really important speech, and in fact at the time was meant to be a call to action. I think one of the interesting things is, while nuclear still faces the same degree of headwinds that we had seen at that time, and some of them have actually progressed a little bit, we are seeing, you know, within states, local communities around the world, folks thinking differently about how to take limited resources, how to look at the changing market structure of the electric power sector, how to think about technology evolution, and look anew at whether or not there are new strategies evolving for nuclear within the energy sector. So I hope that we're going to get to some of that today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jane Nakano, who's a senior fellow in the energy program, to run the first panel. But just so you know, the first panel focuses on the core of competition, which is economic competition. The second is nuclear within a carbon-constrained future. And then the third is the national security imperative that Dr. Henry talked about at the end of his opening remarks. We wanted to remind everybody that this entire session is webcast, so if you can please silence your cell phones and all of those sorts of things, that'd be very helpful. Also, if you're watching at home or online, you can participate in the conversation using the hashtag CSIS Live. When we get to the question and answer period, you can also pose questions that way, and we'll try and work them into the discussion. So we thank you all for being here and hope you'll stay not to the third panel, as Dr. Henry said, but to the reception after the third panel, where we'll have a little bit more discussion. So without further ado, I want to welcome Jane in the first panel.
And then Bob. Oops. Thanks so much, Sarah, and also thanks to Dr. Henry for great leadership in having sort of CSI's focus on some of the most challenging issues in today's energy world. And nuclear is where many issues, not just economics, but as Sarah said, sort of security, climate, environment, all these issues also come together and present us with a number of sort of possibilities, both positive and negative. And for this first panel, we are here to really talk about, better understand what sort of the nature of the competition, if you will, both at home and abroad, but then also to try illuminate what are some of the paths forward, where the opportunities may be for the U.S. Nuclear reactor technology, and then and also the industry to either stay competitive or regain competitiveness. So it depends on how you look at the situation currently. But on the existing fleet side, we've seen about half dozen reactors get retired since 2013, and more reactors are said to be retiring in the coming years. And as the nuclear power generation faces fierce competition from cheap natural gas, also a robust reduction in cost associated with the renewable energy power generation. So the existing fleet is under quite a bit of a constraint. And also looking at the new builds, we had a very sort of a big news during the Obama administration how EPAC 2005, the Energy Policy Act 2005, where President Bush and the Congress worked hard to put together sort of a framework to incentivize new nuclear, finally got the sort of concrete movement. Obama administration gave loan guarantees to Vogtle. But on the new front too, we've seen a bit of a challenge. As you might know, last August, VC summer plant in South Carolina had to be canceled. Also, we're looking at plant Vogtle in Georgia, state of Georgia, go under quite a bit of a public ratepayer scrutiny as both projects have had experienced cost overrun and also schedule overrun. So on the new build front as well, we're sort of trying to watch closely as to what that may say about the role of nuclear. And also on the export front, about 10 years ago, about a decade ago, the U.S. Westinghouse AP1000 units were sold to China, and the construction has been underway. But since then, we haven't seen too many orders, actually, if any at all. Of course, that's not just because, in my view, because of U.S. nuclear. Fukushima nuclear accident happened. It really changed the tone of public discussion on the role of nuclear. But then, since then, U.S. industry is looking at markets like India, also Saudi Arabia, but we haven't seen any concrete sort of new order being sort of signed in the past about past decade. Also on the technology front too, well, actually that's something that there's actually a lot of excitement, if I may say. There just about a month ago, NuScale became the first and only SMR designed to get the initial pass the initial review phase before NRC, U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it's making progress. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of unknowns because we certainly haven't seen any demonstration project. So there are a lot of excitements, but then also still a lot of questions associated with what SMR may do for the U.S. Nuclear industry. Anyways, today I'm joined by two experts to help us, again, appreciate the nature of the competition, but then also better appreciate where the opportunities may lie as the U.S. nuclear industry tries to regain competitiveness. To my far right is Bob Coward, who is the president of the American Nuclear Society and the principal officer of NPR Associates, which is an international specialty engineering and technical service company. His career has focused on nuclear power plant design, evaluation, and development with specific expertise in the areas of project management, safety analysis, and design and development of new nuclear power plants. He has also had an advisory or leadership role at various institutions, including DOE, NEI, and EPRI. To my immediate right is Bill Freeman, who is the S&P Global Platts Senior Managing Editor for nuclear power. He oversees publications, pricing, and information services in the nuclear field. He heads a team of 7 editors and reporters based in Washington, London, and Tokyo. Bill covers global nuclear energy development with a focus on new nuclear power financing and construction. Thanks both for joining. So let me get started. I'm not a technical person, and it's always good for me, and I think a lot of us here to better appreciate what's been happening in sort of U.S. nuclear technology scene. Bob, if you could give us sort of a snapshot or sort of a teaser, if you will, in 7 to 8 minutes about what's been happening with U.S. nuclear reactor technology development scene, including commercialization.
Yeah, I told Jane that this event only goes till 6, so I have to be brief. I think the short answer is there's a lot more going on than people think.
Okay.
And I think what's most exciting to me, and I'll tie it back to a couple things, is I had the privilege, I sit in a chair at NPR, I lead NPR, and NPR was founded by the 3 key guys who worked for Admiral Rickover in the development of the Naval Propulsion Program and the original commercial industry. And so I was lucky enough to have started when they were still there. Mm. And one of the things that Ted Rockwell told me years ago, R of NPR, he was Rickover's chief engineer, all right? And Ted used to tell me, he said, do you know why we picked pressurized water reactor? And I said, why? And he said, people think we picked it because it was the best. They're wrong. He said, we picked it because it was the one we had the highest confidence we could deliver as fast as possible. And so to the question of, could there be other reactor technologies which are simpler, more cost-effective, faster to delivery, maybe even, I'll use that word, safer? Potentially the answer is yes, all right? They weren't pushed at the time because they weren't the brute force, we were at war, we had to win, right? Confidence was more important than elegance. And I think if you look right now what's going on across the country, I forget what the latest number is on the third way map, 55, 60, I don't know, 117 different organizations trying to develop advanced nuclear technology. What's really interesting to me is so many of them, you go talk to them and they're using information and research from 1962, 1967, 1965. And what they're trying to do, in at least my version of it, is the questions that weren't answered at the time, when the priority went over here, student body left, and the other technologies became more areas to study, to investigate, to think about, they're trying to pull some gravity back towards those and just dig a little deeper and ask the question, how can we commercialize these? And do they make sense? What are the key gaps? And I come from the camp, as I think is going to be the theme of the day, where the question of can we compete doesn't matter. We have to win. We have no choice, but for many, many reasons. And the challenge we have with the light water reactor technology, at least the current light water reactor technology, is it's complex. Arguably some of the most complex machines on the planet beyond the Apollo system, all right? And so with complexity comes cost, with complexity comes regulation, with complexity comes schedule and challenges. And I think there's a lot of work which I'm encouraged by, people doing the research, doing the study, asking the right questions. Can we take these other technologies which are simpler, faster, and get them to market in a way that makes sense? Because it has to make sense. It can't just be nifty. It has to be attractive. It has to fill the needs of society. It has to hit the mark. And I'll give my standard comment. I'll probably a few times in the next little while I'll say things people don't like. The first one is that, in parallel with the focus being on light water reactor technology for 50 years and these other technologies being sort of over here on the side, we've gotten really good in this country at studying and researching these. It's time to start making progress on the implementation aspect of them. We can't, especially from a Department of Energy, U.S. government supportive perspective, the whole culture and attitude needs to change from research, development, and study to step 1 and step 2 of implementation. And when things don't seem to make the mark, we got to learn from them, push them aside, and go to something else, and we have to make progress. We can't just be content to generate heat. And so if you look on the advanced reactor front, I think more and more people are buying into some of the things, understanding what I've just talked about, and I think there's a lot of promise there. That's the future out there on the horizon. I personally think it's incredibly bright for U.S. technology, both here and abroad. You got to get there. And the way you get there is you have to firm a foundation on today, and you got to build a bridge to it. And in this country right now, as well as around the world, that appears to be centering around small modular reactors. Small modular reactors are an opportunity to leverage and build from the technology that we have decades operating successfully, that we understand, but to do it in a way that addresses some of the key challenges. Some of the people in the room know, I know Bill knows, that 10 years ago during the Renaissance, it seems to get shorter as time goes on, but during the Renaissance, I was leading the project to build 2 ABWRs at the STP site in Texas. And we had a meeting with the CEOs who were the owners of the project. And we met in Tokyo because Toshiba was one of the key project participants. And so we had the CEO of NRG Energy, a merchant energy company, and the CEO of CPS Energy, a municipal utility. They could not have been more different. They had joined together to build a nuclear power plant. And we went through all the finances. And I filled a whiteboard with what does it cost to build a nuclear power plant. And we got to the end, and I had worked from the left and worked from the right, and I'd circled a number in the middle that was the total project cost. And then I wrote on the whiteboard, divided by 2,700 to get $1 per kilowatt overnight capital cost. And one of the gentlemen in the room looked at me and said, just so you know our perspective, the number you circled, the per kilowatt cost, we're okay with that. You may not believe me, it's a little high, but we're okay with that because we're taking a long view. He said, the number above it, I have no idea what to do with that number. I just simply can't, where do I get that amount of money? Right. And so the key to me, the key advantage of the small modular reactors is this double-edged benefit of, one, it simply doesn't cost $12 billion. Which makes it practical to even think about buying it. And the second, especially in this country, is you can't forget about the whole market. I mean, in the end, we're trying to deliver a product to market. And if, with the exception of a few very local areas, there is no load growth in this country. If anything, it's getting smaller. And so you need to be able to add capacity incrementally to adapt your product's offering to the market demand you're trying to meet. And so those are the two things that I think the small modular reactors where they show promise. We got to go do it. Simply put, we got to go do it. There's a lot of questions, especially about the economic viability, that aren't going to get answered until we go do it. And so I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think from a technology standpoint, between leveraging our existing technology, going forward, building a bridge, and then taking advantage of the opportunity in the future, I personally think there's a lot of reasons to feel optimistic.
Great. It's great to be able to actually start on a very optimistic note. Let me turn to Bill next. I mean, so Bob did already sort of introduce the economics associated with, with U.S. nuclear technologies as we're starting to shift from, large conventional size light water reactors to small modular that may be both, either light water based or otherwise. But mainly, let's get started on the domestic side. I mean, what's happening? I sort of mentioned about natural gas and also renewables, but give us sort of your sort of a journalistic, objective take on what's happening. What are the challenges, economic challenges that the nuclear is facing here in the U.S.?
Yeah, certainly. There is a well-known litany of problems facing nuclear energy, but it does come down to what the price of power is. And the price of power, as everyone who's involved in the industry knows very well, is very, very low. And it's a combination of factors. Outside of the United States, a big factor is feed-in tariff subsidies, basically for renewable energy, and that's an issue in certain parts of the United States, especially in the upper Midwest, parts of Texas, where the growth of wind power has really brought prices down to the point where prices are sometimes negative. A nuclear power plant in Illinois, if it wants to continue to operate, actually has to pay to put its power on the grid. And the people from Exelon are losing their minds over this, okay? And they're actually, and this has not been widely reported, they're starting to ramp down their Illinois power plants at times of hot peak wind production. And they're doing this very cautiously in combination with the grid operator to make sure that there's no impact. But it is essentially a load following kind of nature, which is very anathema to most of the nuclear engineers out there. The NRC doesn't particularly like this. These machines were built to run 100% for as long as they can, and some of them are capable of running at 100% output for 300, 400 days, right? That's not impossible. It's the goal. So you have this case where power prices.
700.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm saying, yeah, uninterrupted runs, yeah, but at 100% the whole time. Anyway, so you have this case where people are not getting money for a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant is pretty expensive to operate. So the problem of low power prices, of negative power prices, is potentially the biggest challenge faced. Like I said, outside of the U.S., it's because of these feed-in tariffs. Inside the U.S., the cost of natural gas is a big challenge. Some nuclear power plants have the misfortune to be located right where natural gas is being pumped out of the ground. And if you have that problem, you're also really struggling financially. And so people in the industry have been telling me for 10 years, oh, the price of natural gas is inherently volatile. It's just a matter of time before it spikes up. But in fact, technological developments in extraction and exploration for natural gas have maybe represent a sea change in how we might want to think about natural gas, at least in the midterm. And so there's no analyst, there's no forecast for high natural gas prices that I'm aware of, at least into the next 10, 15 years. So this is the challenge that people face. The challenge that Bob and his clients face is making nuclear power less expensive. And that's also where the SMR advanced reactor developments are showing some early potential, and we have to be skeptical. I'm always skeptical, but we should all be skeptical, because there is no small modular reactor right now operating anywhere on the planet, really, if you discount naval reactors and a few icebreakers that Russia has. And so this hasn't been proven. This hasn't been proven out. It hasn't been tried. You're fighting some laws of economics that are pretty fundamental, right? Economy of scale is why we have 1,600 megawatt nuclear reactors. The Germans built all these units. The French said, you know what, we can build a bigger one, and developed a special turbine to power a 1,600 megawatt EPR reactor that they designed. The idea is you build a bigger reactor, the cost per megawatt hour is going to be less. That's pretty basic economics. So you're fighting that when you decide, like NuScale Power, that you're going to build 12 50 megawatt units and call that a plant. But there is this financing issue. There's a huge penalty to building a reactor for 10 years, paying the financing of $9 billion, and not getting your money flowing in until 10 or 15 years after you start this work. So that's what they're counting on. We don't know if it's going to work, but there's potential. And in the advanced reactor space, there's some suggestion that the regulator will allow you to do things a little differently if you can show that your reactor is very unlikely to have a severe accident. And both NuScale and some of the advanced reactor developers with gas-cooled and molten salt reactors, there's the idea that you might not need a 6-foot thick concrete wall around the whole thing. Your containment barrier might be different. You know, you might not need, as NuScale has proven, these Class 1E electrical power systems, which are these really robust electrical systems that have to work all the time, and they're very, very expensive to produce. The parts are expensive, the engineering is expensive. Everything about it costs more money. So if you don't have to have some backup systems, if you don't have to have as robust electrical systems, you may be able to really take a lot of costs out of nuclear plants. And this is the bet that advanced reactor developers are making. And again, we have some experience with advanced reactors in the 60s. It's true, we actually built all these things, one or two of them. Many of them operated pretty well, some of them did not. And now we're picking up the torch again, and we're going to find out if some of these are built, whether they actually have the potential to become commercialized and to represent an economic advantage. And nuclear power today has to offer an economic advantage, or it will not compete, not in the US and not overseas, where an increasing number of markets are also deregulating, they're becoming more competitive, and this means that the challenge is spreading to reduce the costs of nuclear power, not just in capital costs, although those have to come down, but the operating costs must also come down.
And if I can just add one thing, just to reemphasize something Bill led with, because it's so important. I look around this room, I can't see everybody, but I see Mike over there. If I told Mike Wallace when he was at BG&E, and ComEd if I had told him in 1992 that in 1998 a nuclear power plant operating was going to generate electricity for $19 a megawatt hour, all in OM and fuel, he would have said, I'm speculating, he would have looked at me and said, my gosh, we'd be almost there. That's approaching too cheap to meter. And he would have said, no way, can't be done. Yet we have plants doing that today, and they're being told they're too expensive. And so one of the challenges we do have is we don't just have cheap energy in this country. We have cheap energy in this country. And the nuclear team, we have to find, we can't let that stop us from being successful. We're innovative, we're smart, we're good, we're successful. And it's up to us to work within the constraints and confines of that problem definition and still deliver what society is looking for us to deliver, which is so important.
Both of you sort of mentioned how there are sort of regional differences, and I agree. I think energy in this country has gotten cheap, but cheap from actually different fuels. In some parts of the U.S. it's cheap because of, let's say, wind, and other parts it's mainly natural gas, etc. When I think of the future, what sort of support going forward? Not to be prescriptive, but let's look at the way that AP 1000 projects have experienced setbacks. It sort of touches a lot of regional sort of energy mix decision making, but then also national level as well. How do you think incident like that has impacted the overall U.S. national support? I think there, folks do recognize their different strengths and benefits. But for example, Vogtle has loan guarantee. Going forward, can we mobilize a type of political support, both the executive branch and Congress, to have the continued support for new bills, including for SMR?
Well, I think the bill should weigh in, but if you ask me, the biggest issue with what's happened to the AP 1000 program in this country is everybody who has been inclined to have negative perceptions of us, it tended to reinforce almost every one of them. And I think that, and so that really hurt us. And we have a credibility confidence problem in addition to the economic problem and the technology problem. They all run together. That we have to, as a collective industry, we have to recognize it, and then we have to fight through it and beat it back down. And unfortunately, the only way we're going to beat it back down is through performance, not through words.
Yeah. You know, I think that's right, and one of the lessons of the Vogtle and the Summer project was also a similar two-reactor plant that South Carolina Electric and Gas was going to build, and they literally walked away from it after spending $9 billion of ratepayer money, and that's a disaster in South Carolina. I mean, they're going to be talking about this in South Carolina in 20 years, yeah. And they are turning themselves into pretzels trying to figure out what to do about that situation. But the fact, if you look back, the story that Bob told about somebody sitting looking at the price of these projects and just getting sticker shock, the fact is, even before the Summer project began, South Carolina Electric and Gas was, everybody knew that this was a very small utility trying to build a huge monster project. And people said, even back then, people told me, this is a bet the company proposition. And they bet the company and they rolled the dice and they lost.
And it's basically killed two companies.
That's right. SC&G, its parent company, may be bought by Dominion. It may not. We don't really know. And there are other companies that are on the chopping block as a result of it. Westinghouse filed for bankruptcy as a direct result of this problem. So yeah, the observation is, yeah, you can't do that. Right. And there are lessons in there. We could unpack them a little bit, but this was bright, shiny new technology that was promised to be better and superior to what preceded it, and it ended up having the exact same problems that a lot of these other bespoke stick-built plants had in the 70s and 80s. And we canceled 20-some plants in that time period as a result of management problems, licensing, regulatory issues, economic changes that had happened. So this is not new ground that we're plowing here, but the nuclear industry has to figure out how to not keep doing this.
Right. You just mentioned ratepayers. How about investment community? What sort of an impact do you think it has had? There are some investor-owned utilities out there.
I bet you there are no bankers here in the room, and there's a reason why.
I was going to say, did you just use investment community and nuclear power in the same sentence?
Yeah.
I did.
Okay.
It is. There's not a lot of investors you talk to that are really excited about getting into the nuclear power. And nuclear power has not been able to produce a thing that is pretty mandatory in every other kind of power plant construction, which is project finance, which is a method for building and financing power plants in which a sponsor basically sets up a sort of a shell company that attracts the investment needed to build the plant, and that's just impossible with a nuclear plant. It hasn't happened anywhere on the planet.
And I think that goes back to my comments earlier as to when you talk about, I've spent a career on light water nuclear power plants. I've come around to the idea that they're in the rearview mirror, that if the nuclear future, I think, does look different. And one of the reasons why the nuclear future is different than the past is we do need the investment. We do need the financing. And people just aren't going to put a lot of money into something where they don't see a return for 12, 14 years.
Right.
And one of the potential, we hope will become real, advantages and benefits of the advanced reactors is simply concept to production much faster. That alone it doesn't guarantee you investment, but that alone will creates a better framework to potentially get the investment.
Yeah.
So it's not just the financial structure or also sort of a, let's say, project management, but that caused the delays and challenges associated with AP 1000. I mean, did I hear you right? I mean, is there something, about the large-scale nuclear that just makes it fundamentally more challenging?
It's with complexity and size comes, the more there is, the probability of any one little thing going wrong could be very low. As the number of those very small little things you have to do approaches infinity, the probability that something might go wrong starts to get high. And if you look at the AP 1000 program, the two comments I'll give you are, one, if you want to understand the key lessons learned, go read all the DOE and EPRI reports from the 90s and 2000s, looking at all the lessons learned from the 70s and 80s, because it's all the same lessons, which is very unfortunate from an industry standpoint. And number two, the problems at Vogtle and Summer had almost nothing to do with the nuclear steam supply system. It was everything else.
Yeah, and I would add to that yes, but the AP 1000 was in fact a design that was designed from the start to take out complexity
Yes.
from the machine. And so there's way less piping, there's a lot less of a lot of the things that were tripping people up in construction. It was designed to be built in a modular method that adopted these shipbuilding techniques that have been very successful in Japan in the ABWR project. But the modularity of the AP1000 actually almost killed it because we didn't know how to do it. They brought in some oil and gas industry companies that were doing this similar type of piping work but had not worked in the nuclear space where documentation and quality control are so much higher. And that really tripped them up in a big way. And it was an effort to make it simpler, and it still didn't really work out. Now, the EPR in Europe is a machine that was designed to be even more complicated than the ones before it, and understandably, they've also experienced massive delays.
Yeah. Now, I don't mean to jump around, but let me quickly go back to the existing fleet scene. So, again, we did already talk about how there are some regional differences. Just yesterday, the governor of New Jersey signed a bill that will basically allow, the value of nuclear as zero carbon or low carbon emitting source of electricity to be, positively valued going forward. So this is after New York, after Illinois, and now, well, I guess there are a couple, different states that have been trying, but then, we've seen New Jersey do that. For the foreseeable future, are we going to see some much more concrete steps coming from the state level? In other words, do you expect this type of effort to be replicated successfully in the US for some time? And also internationally, are there other advanced economies with nuclear playing a pretty healthy share of the power generation mix doing something similar to this?
Well, there's a bunch of questions embedded in there. I'll give you my personal take. In terms of, will we see any more Illinois, New York, New Jersey's? Yep. And don't forget Connecticut. Connecticut also is in their mix.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I would say Ohio, maybe, but not until next year at the earliest, after the election. The governor is not supportive at all. Pennsylvania, which is a big one for the nuclear industry.
Yes, yeah.
No, unfortunately, no. And it's not obvious anybody really behind that. And so I think at the state level, we're seeing sort of where we're going to be for a while. It is what it is, but that doesn't mean we can't. And as also, I want to remind you, you mentioned the locality differences. And it's actually more significant than everybody realizes. People tend to think of different markets. And I'll give you for example, one of my company's good customers is Exelon. At Calvert Cliffs, a plant numerous are familiar with. Calvert Cliffs is in one of the best nodes in PJM. All right, Exelon is investing right now in Calvert Cliffs. They're investing to strengthen it, to ensure it's reliable for a long time, and to make more money at Calvert Cliffs. Limerick, which for years was the jewel of the Exelon fleet, is in arguably the worst node in PJM in South.
And by worse, you mean the prices are
prices.
low.
Prices. Excuse me. Thank you, Bill. The people who write and talk for a living, they do a better job. Limerick is in arguably the lowest price node in PJM. They're only a few hundred miles apart. Limerick is really, they're trying to figure out how to save because Limerick's in a tough spot right now. And those differences really aren't fully appreciated by everybody. And then I guess the last comment I'll give you, you mentioned internationally, and we should come back to that before this panel leaves, is not only one of the differences you see internationally is compared to the US private companies are out competing with government-sponsored organizations to supply.
Yep.
When you're talking abroad, you also tend to be talking to customers who are government organizations. So it's just a very different world. They have a lot more flexibility and tools in their tool chest to make what they think are the right strategic decisions for their stakeholders.
Right. Yeah.
And we get into some big philosophical questions about how societies and countries are organized. A utility in most of the world is a government-owned entity, and it's a really big one. It may cover a whole country. or a big chunk of a country. And here we have, municipal utilities. We have tiny little utilities. This Utah municipal group that's proposing to build an SMR plant. These are little towns out in the middle of the West that are talking about building the first small modular reactor plant. I mean, we're totally in uncharted territory. And when you compare it with, France, where EDF is the state-owned utility, runs their 50 nuclear plants and provides power to just about everybody, right? And it's owned by the government. And the rates are set by the government. Now, everybody is moving towards slightly more privatization, but they don't really mean privatization the way we have it. Private investor-owned utilities and power generating companies, not necessarily. So we're in a different boat than most other countries.
Yeah, and it's, I'm glad that you mentioned France. I mean, to some extent, it's although even sort of established nuclear economies, France has always had more of a hybrid system, or maybe it's more of a state, but it's still different from, let's say, Russia or China model, right? I mean, but then seeing the sort of a struggle that the French industry is going through, sometimes I wonder to myself, if nuclear energy or nuclear power generation program is even compatible with the capitalist market-based economy. And before getting into as a reactor supply side, which I do want to talk about, but as power generation source for general public. I mean,
I would say that you have to think, and again, too much discussion about nuclear energy is done through an excessively Western lens. We think it's true. 35 years ago, if you were talking about nuclear power, you would be only talking about the United States, pretty much. You'd be talking about, well, combustion engineering is doing great. Westinghouse has got a venerable model. GE has the latest thing in VWRs. Today, we're not there. We have to talk about South Korea. South Korea is a very capitalist society, right? And they're doing very well with their nuclear power. They are exporting reactors. They're building on time and on budget in the Middle East their first export project, and there's nothing magical about that. It's not a state system as much.
But KEPCO is, right?
Korea, again, in most of the world, there's state-owned utilities, even in very Western countries and very capitalist countries. But so it is a question for us about how we've organized our electric power sector. Right. It's not for me to say, but it's something we have to be aware of.
And I think a lot of that goes, Bill, to just getting the stakeholders in this country just to appreciate and understand how the world is different and how different than here. I'm just curious, when we talk about abroad, I'm just curious, I'm not sure how many people in this room, how many people in this room have been in the room and listened to Rosatom talk to prospective clients to make essentially a sales pitch? I ended up by accident being in the room. Oh. It was a public forum.
That must have been. Oh,
but I'm just wondering, has anyone ever heard their pitch? Yeah.
Couple. Yeah.
It was really, really good.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really good.
Wow.
I mean, it was a public forum, but they made a presentation to a set of potential customers, and Westinghouse spoke first. Hitachi spoke second. Rosatom spoke third. You could not compare the presentations. The Westinghouse and Hitachi stood up and they talked about how good their technology was. Rosatom stood up and talked about what their technology was going to do for the customer. And they talked about not only the benefits of their technology, they talked about the benefits to the customer of the whole boot package that they're out selling. Right. And I had always wondered to myself, how do these good people succumb to that? And I sat in the room, and I didn't succumb, but I will tell you, I understand how those people succumb now. Right. And I think one of the cultural things we need the US technology companies to understand is we're not entitled to be successful. We have to earn our success. And earning our success means understanding the customer base, understanding the customer's pinch points and touch points and value statement, and engaging with the customer, recognizing his business culture, his societal culture, and hitting the mark for that customer. And I personally believe that's one of our biggest challenges, is we tend to go out, I've seen it happen, we tend to go out and sell the world as if they're Americans. And most of the rest of the world doesn't resonate with us the way Americans do. And so that cultural acceptance of just recognizing it's a different playing field where we have to earn our success. And by the way, I think we can. But recognizing that, I think, is a key element of competing abroad.
And I will add, on the Russian state nuclear company Rosatom is basically a ministry of government, if you think about it that way. And they operate that way. They don't operate as a company trying to sell a product. They operate as a nation trying to deliver a relationship that involves the purchase of nuclear power plants and nuclear fuel for their lifetimes. This is big business. It's cash for Russia, and they've really pivoted. Rosatom is going to spend 70% of its capital investment next year is going to be outside of Russia in nuclear power plants. So they're really pivoting because they also are experiencing slow demand growth, and they need to export reactors to sustain this large industry. And you're right, Bob, they are slick. They've got great engineering. They've got good technology. They probably lead the world in fuel cycle technologies. And they come in and they offer you loans, state-to-state loan for 80% of the cost. They will bring, starting years before the project starts, they start bringing students to their universities, train them up, give them master's degrees and PhDs in nuclear engineering. They provide all the training. They'll send operators to your plant to run it. They will take your spent fuel back from your country, so you don't have to think right away about what you're going to do with that. I mean, that is a package offer that no one else can compete with. And they are the biggest competitor right now for the U.S. and for everybody else.
And the one thing I'll add on top of that is the one thing that I didn't see on the agenda for today that I want to make sure gets mentioned at least once is if I believe our greatest challenge as an industry in this country is collectively embracing the idea we have to change. Not expecting the future. Let's be honest, our industry it's not everybody, but it's dominated by whichever side of the brain is the technical people versus the emotional people. It's an industry dominated by the difficult to change, side of the brain, very logical and thoughtful. And when we get over that, I think there's mountains of opportunity. But getting through the idea of success is going to be great, it just looks different. But we can, at the same time, build it on our past success. I think that culture change on an industry-wide basis is our greatest challenge. I think our greatest opportunity is, of all the people I've met and traveled and dealt with, let's just say that might be the greatest challenge for my generation. I don't see as much of that in our younger people. Our younger people. And I believe that the passion, the creativity, the interest, the capability of some of the younger people who've come into our nuclear industry in this country in the last decade is arguably our greatest asset. And right now, one of the most important things we need to be doing, all of us, in the spirit of competing internationally and at home, is figuring out all the right opportunities and ways to enable those people to flourish and to provide the kind of contributions and leadership and influence that they're capable of. Because I think they will go take the world if we set them up to take the world.
And that's great, and I'm glad that you mentioned sort of human resource side of it. But quickly, I guess, going back to what Russia is doing, and certainly I think Chinese also has, China is not there yet, but China also has a strong aspiration to become a global reactor supplier. These countries, as both of you have mentioned, can offer something that a lot of Western countries may have hard time offering. The build, own, and operate, for example. And especially now that all these advanced industrialized countries that have been also sort of providers of these technologies are facing sort of shrinking power generation, electricity demand growth. There are all these countries that are new, that are interested but have not yet had a nuclear program, right? So that definitely makes offers, like the one that the Russia can offer, extremely attractive. I mean, if I'm a newcomer and if I don't have to worry about the spent fuel, then I don't have to deal with my public about ceding. And if someone can come and operate for me, I mean, what more can you ask? But that's the way it's set up. It's a very integrated model that these state-led economies can provide. And I agree with you. I mean, I think the younger generation, there are more and more, the nuclear experts come in. They're I think ready to compete. But then there are probably also some system-wide, issues that the U.S. probably has. And I'm not trying to put any words into your mouths, but it's a hard stuff to compete. I mean, so who from the I mean, there are some operator companies that may be able to go, but not at the direction of the White House, for example, I would imagine, right? I mean, whereas in Moscow, if someone says, you're going with this.
Well, put yourself, imagine, you're a key decision maker in a foreign country. Mm-hmm. You're probably affiliated with the government to some extent. And Jose Gutierrez, the president of Westinghouse, walks in, says, I want you to buy an AP1000. Mm-hmm. And you said, oh, that sounds great. Okay, where do I sign? Well, we'll give you the nuclear steam supply system and the technology, but you're going to have to go find somebody to build the rest of the plant. Or if you want, we can help you find that guy, but it's going to have to be somebody that's acceptable to you and to us. All right? Yeah. And then the guy says, okay, well, we can find that guy. Mm-hmm. How much is this going to cost? Oh, that much? More am I going to, well, let me go back and let me go back to Washington and see if the XM Bank is working these days. All right, or not. Okay, if you just the logistical challenges of dealing with Team America. Yep. I had about a month and a half ago. I had some of the leaders from the Kenya is trying to develop a nuclear power program. All right, right now they have a 2,000 megawatt grid in Kenya. All right, and they're trying to develop a nuclear power program for all the right reasons. Economic security, building up the wealth, the overall, how people are doing. I mean, just every good reason. Yep. And I mean, I'm just, part of me is thinking, you got to be kidding me, all right? But they sat there and they explained why they made the decision to go with the Russians. Mm-hmm. They haven't made a formal decision to go Rosatom, but that's clearly where they're headed. And one of the things they talked about was how Rosatom had made it easy for them. And right now, it's hard for us to make it easy for a customer internationally.
Right.
It's all about an integrated offer in the global nuclear tenders. Everybody is looking for it, and the United States has to provide it. And it's very telling that the Saudi Arabia, when it went out looking for vendors to provide with its first nuclear power plants, here you have a country that can actually afford it, right? So this is a big deal. Yeah. And they went out and they asked for people to participate, and the United States was not one of them. It was China, South Korea, and the Russians were there. The French got an invitation, but the U.S. did not, and so U.S. officials had to actually go and beg them to let U.S. companies participate. And eventually, U.S. did come up with sort of what was starting to look like an integrated offer, right? We have to see if this is going to really work, but Westinghouse went in with a constructor engineering company, and very importantly, with Exelon, who is widely acknowledged to be the most effective and efficient nuclear power operator in the world. I mean, let's say something about Exelon. They have cut refueling outages, which at one time, 60 days, 90 days, and a lot of countries, even to this day, 90 days to refuel a reactor. Exelon's doing it in 17 to 20 days now, consistently. So they're doing something right there. And now we're going in with 3 companies, and we're going to see if the government part of it is going to follow. And that's a question I really have for Bob, because I don't know the answer. Is this administration going to be able to swing the integration of financing, this other support? They've been very vocal, right? We hear them talking about, oh, nuclear power is great. This is sort of a new willingness to talk about nuclear power. new willingness to twist some arms because they got the Saudis to invite the U.S. to participate. They ran through a Part 810 approval that was also required for the U.S. to share information with the Saudis on this. And so they seem to be doing some of the things right. But Bob, what do you think is going to happen in terms of leveraging money from Exim Bank? The Trump administration is not really well known for throwing money at problems. They're more about taking away regulations, right?
I'm not sure I'm the right person, but I can tell you what I think or what I'm concerned about. Yeah. What I'm concerned, if you ask me, the biggest anxiety I have about the U.S. being successful in Saudi Arabia, the companies that are involved, and it's more than just Westinghouse. You know, there's a number of major companies involved who are presenting themselves as a team. You can find them if you look hard. We've met with them. I've met with them. At some point in time, somebody is going to have to take the collective risk of the project. Right. And at some point in time, those companies are going to have to agree to a contractual structure. And what you're going to find is, whether you're talking about, I'm not saying these are these companies, but companies like Westinghouse, GE, Bechtel, Fluor, Exelon, companies like that, what they all tend to have in common is they will sign a contract and be part of a team with risk any day, as long as everybody else takes the risk. And somehow or another, they're going to have to sit in a room with the U.S. government and figure out, how do we, as a team, take the risk of this project. And what I'm worried about, as someone who leads a commercial entity, what I'm worried about is the attitude in the room is going to be everybody looking at the U.S. government, saying, U.S. government, take this risk. I don't know if they can or can't. I know it could be hard. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm actually very anxious about. I mean, because we're not talking about a little bit of money. We're talking about, but at the same time, if you look at the Saudi, the announced public attributes of this Saudi program, this is, it's something worth taking risk for. But the question is, can the right stakeholders find a way in their guts and with their own stakeholders to take that risk?
And how important is XM in this equation?
I'm not sure I don't know enough to tell you how important XM is, as much as there needs to be some vehicle where the U.S. facilitates, I will call the integrated financing.
Okay. Bill, any thought on the
Yeah, no, not really. I think it's historically that's been XM's role. It played a part in the deal for South Korean companies to build reactors in UAE. A key part was actually played by XM, which guaranteed a certain amount of financing and allowed the U.S. companies to participate by supplying significant components to those plants. But since then, it's not clear. XM has had a lot of problems. And philosophically, again, the Trump administration has this element within it that is super pro free enterprise and very much a laissez-faire kind of anti the government getting involved in commercial business. And so that, I think, probably is a challenge that's before us. And we should mention that the non-proliferation issues surrounding exporting reactors to Saudi Arabia are actually fairly significant. It's not clear that there's political support yet for a deal that would allow, we need what's called a 1-2-3 agreement that will allow trade with Saudi Arabia. We don't have one currently, and to do nuclear reactors over there requires that deal, and there are many people who are against that, and it's not clear where that's
And I think, let me just add, I think that goes, your summary just now just goes back to the idea of what Dr. Amre said when we started, which is, I'm by nature a relatively conservative guy in just about everything, but at the same time, free market, I've come around to the idea that when you look at economic security, national security, preservation of our key resources, maybe I'm just biased and no longer independent. I've come around to the idea that you have no choice. You need a successful, thriving nuclear power program.